Hello everybody, my name is Zeke. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be starting a new reading vlog, which I haven't actually done in a while, but I was recently at the bookstore and happened to pick up randomly two books that I can loosely fit into a theme, so I'm just going to go with that. And also I was able to loop something else in that I've been reading, so I think that I decided this could be a little fun experiment, even though as you'll see, the theme is kind of very, very loose. But the three books I have or that I'm gonna read are all have like short content in some way. So two of them are short story collections, and the third one is an essay collection. So I can't even call this like short fiction because one of them is nonfiction essays. But I just thought it could be interesting to read some shorter stuff, just get a lot of different also like genres, I guess, essays versus short stories, and the two different short story collections I have are very different in tone and style. So it's kind of a variety within this loose theme. But the first book I'm gonna read in this vlog is Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. This is her first book, one of her most popular books of essay collections, and I've read a lot of Joan Didion at this point and somehow have not managed to pick this up. So I think it's finally time. I'm expecting just to love this a lot because I really have loved everything else I've read by her. I don't know much about like specific content she covers in this, but I know lots of essays like about the 60s and just her life in like California. That's usually something she talks about heavily, so I'm sure I'll love a lot of this. Also, I just love the cover a lot. I also have this short story collection called Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata. I decided to pick this up. Actually, I didn't even know it was a short story collection, which is kind of my bad, but I've read two of her other books. I think they might be the only other two that are actually translated into English so far, but that's Convenience Store Woman, which is very popular, and another one of her books, Earthlings, which I actually liked more. I think she's kind of hit or miss for me. Her writing style is very almost cryptic in a way. I think there's also a lot of like social commentary in her books, and I think that's what is like the interesting part. But I think they're often also very weird, and I think if the weirdness works, it works. And it worked for me in Earthlings, but it didn't necessarily work for me in Convenience Store Woman. But since this is a bunch of short stories, I'm sure that I'll find stuff to love in here, so I'm excited for that. And then lastly, I'm not going to read the whole thing of this, but this is kind of a little bit shameful. I picked up the Stories of John Cheever in March, I want to say, because I read one of his most popular short stories, The Swimmer, a while ago, and just love it so much and think about it a lot, and somehow never managed to pick up anything else. So this is like, they weren't lying when they said it's the stories of, it's not selected stories of, it is like 600 pages of, I think, pretty much every single short story he ever wrote. So it is a lot to get through, and I'm not gonna say like they all feel the same, but there is a lot of repetition in like the kinds of things he talks about. So this is something I had always planned to read in short bursts, and didn't even do that. I read like a few when I got the book, and then I kind of just put it to the side and haven't picked it up. So I'm gonna try to read a few stories from this just to get a little further in, because I do enjoy it. I do enjoy the writing generally a lot. I just need to actually commit. But as I said, I am gonna start with Slouching Towards Bethlehem. I'll read a little and I will check in when I have some thoughts on some of the essays I've read. Okay, I'm a good portion of the way through the book now. I'm on the first part of the book. The book is split into three parts. This first part is called Lifestyles in the Golden Land, which definitely fits all the stories, or at least the first half of the stories were definitely these character studies that we got, and then the other two that I read like after those first string of stories are still like focused around groups of people or places or lifestyles in the Golden Land. I decided to stop right now because I'm right before like the title story, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and it seems like a bit of a longer one, and so I wanted to just talk about everything else I've read so far before I got into it. As I said, these have all been kind of character studies, and they're kind of random. The thing about Joan Didion is she's very, very observant, and also she's very, very good at building atmosphere around these stories she's telling and kind of connecting them into her wider thoughts about the world. And so, so far my favorites have been the first one, which is kind of this, it tells the story of this murder that happened in, I think, LA. And when like this husband and wife went out one night and their car caught on fire while the husband was asleep inside and the wife was convicted of the murder. I think I just really liked the writing there. I liked the atmosphere and how she kind of built up the story as we went on with the different kind of, I won't say reveals, it doesn't feel like she's trying to like do reveals, but as we learn more information, the way she connects that back to a wider message. And I really liked, she had a story about Joan Baez that I just thought was interesting. And I also like the last story I just read about like Las Vegas weddings. I think that she's just, once again, very observant. And I really like the way that she she obviously has opinions about what she's talking about, but I feel like her voice is so distinct in her writing. The way that it comes across is very smart. It feels very not objective because she's obviously sharing her opinions, but it's just very well thought out and doesn't feel like she's like necessarily judging something, even if she is. And I think that's just like a testament to her voice and how she is able to write these stories so well. So I'm really excited to read Slouching Towards Bethlehem, the title story, because as I said, much longer than most of the other stories so far, and I'm sure it'll be good because also in the preface she talks about how much she likes the story and how she named the book after the story for a reason. So I'll read that, I'll read a little more, and then I'll check in again. Okay, it's been a little while since I checked in, but I actually went to the beach today and I got a lot of reading done, and I was able to finish Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and I gotta say, this absolutely blew me away. I think I was enjoying the first part a lot, but what I really love about Joan Didion is when she gets more personal. I think those end up being my favorite moments from her. And the second two parts, and also that last story, I think in the first part was the best of the first part. But those second two parts specifically, we got a lot more personal, and I really appreciated it. I think the second part's called Personals. So, I mean, you kind of get a sense from that yes, they're more personal. I'll just talk about some standouts. As I said, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, the title story, is kind of about like counterculture in San Francisco in the 60s. It's this very like complex portrait she paints of the whole like atmosphere and these kids who are involved in it. And she, as I said, I think I talked about this with some of the other stories, but she obviously has opinions, but she doesn't pass judgment on what's going on. She more so just lays out this complex group of people and everything that's going on in a way that I think is just very powerful, and she's very good at building these narratives in a way that really just shows how nuanced everything is, which I really appreciate. And then I also think, moving on to the second part, so I'm just looking at the titles, the first one in the second section is about like keeping a notebook, and she talks about like the difference between the memories we like tell ourselves what really happened, and how she kind of keeps this notebook in order to remember specific scenes, and just really beautiful storytelling and little moments from her life that she talks about. And then I really liked, there was one about like Hollywood. It's called I Can't Get That Monster Out of My Mind. It's about like originality. It's about the studio system and independence and movies. Moving on to the third section is all about like places in her life. And I really liked the first story there called Notes from a Native Daughter, which was about her life in Sacramento, where she grew up. It's about the real California. And she talks about all these little towns and her connection to the place. She talks about this place and this atmosphere in such a personal way that I really appreciated. Once again, I really like when she gets personal. And then I'd say I also really, really liked the last story, Goodbye to All That, where she talks about why she left New York. She talks about how she lived in New York for 8 years and how it's a very special place, but it is a place for certain types of people, and you can kind of fall into this pattern that you really need to escape through living in New York. And just a really interesting perspective, and especially as so much of this collection ends up being about LA, San Francisco, Sacramento, and just California in general, having this last story be about New York, I just think really tied things together in an interesting way. We're kind of getting out of the rest of the story, but also it's about her return to California. and I just really liked that as an ending. So overall, I ended up giving this 5 stars. I think this is definitely one of my favorite Joan Didions. I don't know why it took me so long to get to it, but I'm so happy I finally did. And I think out of all like the essay collections and like nonfiction I've read from her, this is probably my favorite, and I'll definitely could see myself coming back to a lot of these very frequently, honestly, because they're just so beautiful and moving. I also was able to start Life Ceremony. I read the first 2 stories. So far, very weird. The first one was about society using like human body parts as like furniture and decoration and clothing. These stories are very vague, they're very ominous, they're very creepy and unsettling, but especially that one, and I think the ending was kind of wacky. And then the second one was about food and strange foods, and I'll leave it at that. But I think the second one was kind of heartwarming. I kind of liked the second one. It was more upbeat and less disturbing. So I guess I will continue with this and see where it goes. So far, I'm liking it, and I'm excited to just read more weird stuff in this. So I'll check in when I'm more into this. Maybe when I'm done, we'll see how far I get. Okay, so I actually just finished Life Ceremony, and it went a lot better than I expected. Honestly, going in, I was kind of unsure of how it was going to go, just because I haven't been like the biggest fan of her work, but I was really excited to read some short stories that I knew were going to be pretty weird, and I definitely got that. But also, I think with like weird short stories, they can go either way for me. Sometimes I really enjoy them, but I think the execution really matters for me. It's fine if the ideas are like interesting and different, but if it's not executed well, like I don't really care. And I think that something about this collection just really worked for me. Something I noticed a lot is in most of these stories, like the endings are very ambiguous, which I think can be like a big downside for a lot of people. But for me, with these kind of weirder short stories, I think like the atmosphere that's built up around them tends to be kind of strange and weird in the first place. So I kind of like more ambiguous endings that don't really necessarily give you like satisfying answers or conclusions. So I really liked what she did here. I also think the writing really lends itself to these kind of strange little glimpses into these worlds we're getting, because I think her writing is a little cryptic, a little, I don't want to say bland, but a little dry at times. But I think it kind of lends itself to the kind of eeriness of a lot of these stories. So getting into more specifics, there was the title story I really liked a lot called Life Ceremony, where the premise of that is that when people die, instead of giving them funerals, they give them life ceremonies where they basically eat the people. So, you know, some light cannibalism, light stuff. I really like how she like frames these characters, how everyone kind of treats it as normal, and then the conversation she's able to have within that. I also really like the last story. I think it was called Hatchlings. It's about this woman who has all these different personalities, and how she kind of has to come to terms with that, how they developed, and how she's kind of treated because of that. I really, really enjoyed that one. And then there was another one that was called Eating the City that I really liked, where it's just about this woman who grew up in the mountains, or at least would visit her grandma in the mountains, and she talks about like all this like wild food she would eat and how she hates like vegetables in the city that she can get there. So one day she decides that she's going to start eating like things in the city, like wild things that she picks, and kind of the society's reaction to that. Very interesting. A lot of stuff just about how people are perceived in society when they're kind of different, that I think she just handles very well. So overall, I really enjoyed this, and you're giving it 4 stars, only because there's a few like smaller stories in here that I don't think really did much for me. I think most of like the longer stories really worked for me, but there were a few that were just like a few pages and were just fine. But I'm very happy I read this, because I really didn't ever think I was necessarily going to pick this up. I just happened to see it, and I'm glad that I did. So now I have to stay true to my word and read some stories from the stories of John Cheever. Otherwise, I'm absolutely never going to get to them. So I have to kind of force myself, but I know I'll probably end up enjoying them. So I'll read probably 1 or 2, definitely more than 1. I have to read more than 1. There's like 60 stories in there, and I have to make some sort of dent. So I'll try to read a few in there, and then I'll talk about them. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up a little. Overall, very successful. I ended up reading 2 stories in here, which doesn't feel like a lot, and definitely isn't. I'm currently on page 118, I think, out of like 700. So obviously, overall, I still have a long ways to go, but I feel like if I just make my way through this slowly, eventually we'll get there. And I think going slow is the way to do it too. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about the two stories I read. The first one, we're following this man who, and like his relationship with this one woman he knows throughout his life, as she goes through multiple relationships, he goes through multiple relationships, but they keep reconnecting in like random ways. And her life seems basically a mess. All these people that she's getting into relationships with are awful for various reasons. And I don't want to say too much more beyond that because it's a short story, but just the way everything panned out, I think the ending specifically, I don't want to say it's a twist. I don't think it's a twist, but it's kind of goes in a direction I wasn't necessarily expecting and really enjoyed, and was a little surprising. And I thought had some interesting commentary on the whole story by the end. And then secondly, there was another story. The other story I read is about this couple who is working class, and they're always working towards their future and being in a place where they can be comfortable and wealthy, and they can never quite seem to get there, but they always hold on to that like dream. And it's kind of about how that dream is an illusion. And I don't think it was necessarily subtle, but I think it's just so well written. He's a great writer, so I enjoyed them. I'm happy to read more of these. And this kind of reminded me that, yeah, these are really good and I need to actually read them when I have time. So yeah, overall, as I said, very successful, very happy with all the books I read and this short story experiment. I would say that everything kind of went better than expected, honestly, especially with Life Ceremony. Very glad that panned out, and very glad I ended up doing this. So if you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.